Welcome to week 8 of Silver Lining for Learning, the 8th episode, I should say. I want to welcome my brother, Paul Kim, with us. We're twin sons of different mothers. Thank you for coming, Paul. It's always a delight to have him available from Stanford, 2:30 there, 5:30 here on the East Coast. There's so much I could say about Paul, but I'll start with a brief story from March 7, 2008 at 3:30 in the morning. I hit the alarm, got on a plane with my son and flew to San Francisco. I was working on a book called The World is Open at the time. And where did I go? The first place I went? No, not to Paul Kim. I went to Wikipedia headquarters. The second place I took my son to was to meet Paul. And I interviewed him at the time about his Pocket School project, which is, it ends up in the book at later chapters. I wanted to start with what the Pocket School project was like, which evolved into the Smile project and other things. Paul is an assistant dean and chief technology officer at Stanford. He teaches classes in instructional technology and has done a MOOC on designing a new learning environment, which had 20,000 people in it. We'll talk about that a little later, but he had project-based learning and all sorts of interesting things happening in his MOOC. But he also is the founder of Seeds of Empowerment. And my son happened to work with him on Seeds of Empowerment in Tanzania, in Argentina, and other places, having kids write books and stories, doing mobile learning, getting literacy built through mobile apps, and kids asking questions of each other. And so I've been following his work for about 15 years or so now, having people in Korea saying, you gotta find this guy, Paul Kim. Some of my close colleagues from Korea, Okwali, I went to grad school with, said, you gotta meet Paul Kim. And he's everything she told me is true. He's gonna show us some phenomenal things. We're gonna have a conversation with him. I thought we'd start with a couple of slides to show where he's been, because the guy's been around the world. And we're glad he's alive because he's got his pilot's license and almost died a couple of months ago because all that power went out on the plane and he had to land with no emergency lights or nothing. So he's with us, it's great. Paul has been to Rwanda, Tanzania, as I said, Indonesia, Honduras, Mexico with the Pocket School Project. And so, and blind kids in India and the Dominican Republic and whatnot. Paul, you want to show us a little bit or talk about that project to begin?
Sure. Thank you, Kurt, for the nice introduction. I'm very impressed with your memory. You memorized it really well. I can't follow you on that. Yeah. Why don't I kind of give you the background of where I started to do these projects. Can you see the slide now?
Yeah, you might want to talk a little bit louder, but yeah, we can see the slide.
Okay, so my mobile learning project started when I started to travel down in Mexico. I went to a place called Camalu, and where I saw farms there where these little niños working in the farm. And I stayed there for a few days and I realized that they weren't going to school. So I was wondering, why aren't they going to school? And that was the eye-opening moment for me. I was shocked that there was no school for these kids. And I wanted to do something about them. And I started to interview these kids with my students who were fluent in Spanish and try to get more stories behind them. They were migrant children. They are following their parents from mountain areas. They come from Oaxaca region. And then because of the climate change and everything, they could not find the crops, fields and things just didn't work for them in the mountains. So they had to come down to farms to work. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to access education somehow. And obviously I didn't have a lot of money to build schools and hire teachers. I didn't have that. So back then I was also using some sort of different technologies I was testing them to see if they would have any value in educational settings. So I started with a little device that was actually designed for museums and for children toys. I loaded Spanish storybooks, sing-along songs, and these are not like your smartphones back then. We're talking about 2005, so iPhone was not invented back then, right? And I started to give these devices to the children and see how they respond to it. I did not want to teach them anything. I just wanted to give them the opportunity to play with these devices and see if they can figure out by themselves. When I asked them to figure out what this is and come back and report to me, they were fiddling with these devices. They were breaking them. They were opening them. They were grinding on the ground and things like that. But about
Paul, I think at the time you were calling it alien pedagogy, isn't that right?
That's right.
Where the aliens have dropped this stuff off and you got to figure out how to use it. Isn't that right?
That's right. So I asked them, can you figure this out for me? I came a long way because I heard that you guys are really smart. So they said, well, no problem. We'll figure it out. And then they were playing with these devices. And all of a sudden, one of the girls was able to turn it on. And then that just changed the whole history of my mobile learning research. Because as soon as one child turned on a device, other kids came to her to ask, hey, what did you do? How did you turn it on? And everybody was able to turn on. So they were teaching each other, hey, if you press this button, that content will come up. If you press that button, that animation will start. If you press that and scroll up and down, within about 20, 30 minutes, they all figured it out. They were able to play the music. They were able to listen to the stories, etc. And they did not know how to read all these stories. So I gave them a printout that goes along with the story. So it's a very simple story. You can play the stories from the device and then match it with the pictures on the printout. And as you can see, these places, they don't have a lot of resources either. They don't have a real reliable access to, obviously, no internet in there, and no reliable access to electricity. So these devices had the pictures and then the dictionaries and stories and sing-along songs. And that's how I started with the Pocket School project. And later on, I was able to get more resources from other partners. And I was able to use a variety of different devices. And I started to take the project to more places around the world. This is a 2009 with math games in Rwanda. And I was able to develop even more content for these little devices. As you can see, there are some devices designed for not only the math and science, and then the health as well. And then also we have executive functioning games, etc. So I have taken it to different parts of the world, like India and Palestine as well. As you can see, this Hindi version of the math farming simulation game. This game came about because when I was talking to the parents of these children in rural areas near Ranchi, they said, we don't want our kids to learn anything but farming. So I had to make a deal with the parents. What if I make them farming games? Would you let me work with these kids? And the parents said, sure, why don't you do that? So I developed the farming games. Actually, this teaches the children literacy, numeracy, entrepreneurship as well. It's all combined in this farming game. But the way that it works is that the children would take loans from banks, and then they would invest the money to buy lands and crops and grow them and harvest the crops and sell them at a different price, etc. So they have to learn a lot to play the game. I also worked with children who had the disabilities, a variety of different disabilities, to play with these games. And these are audio-based games for those children who couldn't see. And I had to start to worry about how do I give them electricity. I had this hand cranking charging device, solar cell, bicycle charging device. And I realized that I don't need to do all these things because we have 1 billion rickshaws in India. We can just plug into the rickshaw for a few minutes and it charges. So, and then they are available in rural areas as well. So I didn't have to worry about the electricity later down the road. So that is the sort of the birth of the Pocket School and mobile learning. And then that led to the SMILE project.
So we should probably pause there because we'll go to Smile second. But back up with Palestine, kids working with kids in Israel, they're writing stories back and forth and sharing stories and whatnot. You won an award for that. You got best paper in ETR Idea, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes. So there are two projects that I've done in Palestine. One is the 1001 Stories, and the other is Executive Functioning Study. So what I've done in Palestine with the 1001 Stories is basically I loaded a lot of stories on these devices so that these students could read them and understand the stories and then be able to write their own stories. So I collected lots of stories from these students, and then I published books based on their stories, and I redistributed the stories back in Palestine as well. So that's the 1001 Stories.
That's
And
social entrepreneurship. Money's coming back to the community based on what kids are
right, and
producing.
then I put the books through a partner called the World Reader. The World Reader reaches about 6 million children around the world with their e-reader program. So we supply, as a Seeds of Empowerment is the nonprofit organization that I founded. And so we supply our stories to World Reader, and then they distribute our stories along with other stories to 6 million children around the world. So that's 1001 Stories. I also involve students in the US as well. So I involve elementary school students in the Silicon Valley area to help edit the stories, help translate the stories, help illustrate the stories. So I involve students from various parts of the world to make this a whole global project. So that's 1001 Story. The other research project that I was able to conduct in Palestine was the executive functioning and critical thinking assessment with the UN refugee school students. So I selected 5 very different school types in Palestine, schools that are very close to the conflict areas versus schools that are very far from the conflict areas. And I gave them these devices loaded with executive functioning games, and I had them play, and I was able to see the performance variations. So the students who are living very close to the conflict areas, their performance score is pretty low. Many of the students complain about the PTSD. They weren't able to quickly learn the game and execute the game as those kids who are living in areas where they don't really see much conflict.
We'll pause you here. Chris wants to jump in, and Punya might want it as well. So before we move on to Smile, we want to ask a couple questions. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure.
Sure. So, Paul, one of the things that I see often in ed tech is people say, well, I can't do ed tech right now because I don't have enough, right? The people don't have smartphones. The people don't have internet. The people don't have wireless electricity, universal electricity, and so on and so on. And I remember our conversations back at this period of time in your work, where with just a feature phone in places that didn't have electricity, certainly didn't have internet, you were able to get kids involved with learning in a very powerful way. And I wonder if you're still seeing this pattern where people think somehow that if they don't have a high-end setup, they can't do anything at all. And have you found some strategies to try to get around that?
Yeah, so I'm having a conversation with organizations in Afghanistan. What I'm hearing from them is that they closed the schools completely. So the children are not able to have access to education. Whereas countries like US or Korea and other places, they still connect to school. They download the videos, and then also they have a two-way communication conference calls like what we are having here. Whereas in developing countries, most of the schools are closed, and then that's it. I think what this COVID-19 will do to the global education ecosystem is that it's going to increase the gap. It's going to start with a digital gap, and the academic performance gaps, and knowledge gap, and all kind of development gaps. This is going to be worsening overall around the world. So what I'm hearing from my partners in the developing countries is that now many of the students that I used to work with now have access to smartphones. They have WhatsApp. And many teachers have access to Facebook and all those conventional social media tools. So I asked them, hey, can you access Smile and see if you can use that in your class right now? Because you can communicate with your students through WhatsApp. Why not use Smile? And what I'm hearing is that, well, we try to Smile, but the concept of getting them to generate their own question is so hard. So it's not the technology now. They have access to technology. I mean, they have no problem using Facebook and WhatsApp with their parents' phones, and they have access to many different resources. But still, the pedagogical gap is so severe. It's still the challenge. So I wouldn't say the technology challenge, because technology is the less of the concern, but the pedagogical gap is so deep and it's rooted in our education system. So that's why it's very slow.
I think Punya's going to jump in here.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Paul, for that. And Chris, great question as always. So I'm just going to pull in a question that was in the chat that's going on YouTube Live. And so this is Josh Reppen, I think, asked the question about, would love to hear your thoughts. And I think it's a good segue from where you left it in the previous question about moving forward through this COVID-19 moment and what you see as sort of the key issues around distance learning once we get to the other side, whatever that other side may be. And I think that one of the things that you mentioned, which to me is like really powerful, which is that the technology is not the issue, that the issue may be a question of our imagination in terms of like the pedagogical approaches and practices that we need to build up in order to take advantage of whatever tools we have in front of us. So, if you could go ahead.
Sure. I call this current situation with COVID-19 a very ironic trigger. I say it's ironic because the longer we experience this COVID-19, the more innovation may come out in the education field. But nobody wants this COVID-19 to be lingering around anymore. We want it to stop right now.
Done, yes.
But ironically, because of this, we are forced to move to the online education world in a matter of weeks. This topic of online education has been out there for multiple decades, and no one really cared. I mean, I would say no one, but a lot of us talked about it, but people haven't changed on their value perception about online education. And still, I think it is still the case. We see a lot of Zoom meetings. Even at Stanford, we have 14,000 Zoom meetings on a daily basis. Everything happens around Zoom. If COVID-19 stops next week, everybody will go back to where they were. And I don't think that we're going to see a lot of change. We may have made a little dent, but what this may create is unpleasant, uncomfortable, sort of displeased experience with online education, because this is just only 8 weeks or so. So that will be engraved in their brain. Hey, we tried it online for 8 weeks. We didn't find any value in it. We wanted to have the real face-to-face. Why bother with online? So probably that will be the case if this ends very quickly.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, finish your thought, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if this continues through the fall, through spring and next year, if this weird situation continues, then people will be even more forced to be creative, innovative, to make this thing work better and better over time. So, humans don't change that fast. 8 weeks is nothing compared to hundreds of years of the education history. So I'm even worried more that, after maybe 2 more weeks, if we all go back to the normal routine, probably this will be remembered as bad experience. That's how I see it.
So one of the things that we've talked about here at ASU is that at some level, this is at the university level, let's say, that students have given us a pass for these 8 weeks. And that when they come back in fall, and if let's say COVID-19 is still on, that they will not, because they will demand a better educational experience, And I think that the example that you gave of Zoom, which was this sort of, let's just take a face-to-face classroom and transplant it into Zoom, which is very different from what you were describing, which is a more exploratory, more open-ended kind of playful learning with these devices, which I think these devices and technologies really allow for play in ways that, you know, are very easy and accessible and so on, but they do require sort of a pedagogical or an educational structure within which they can function. And that requires careful design and thought. You know, and so I would actually, if I can just ask a quick follow-up question around the work that you did, whether with Smile or with the Pocket School, like, what kind of cultural differences came into play in thinking about the implementation of design of these tools? You know, because I'm looking at India and I'm like, you know, reading the Hindi, whether I wanted to or not, because once you see a familiar language, you can't help yourself. And I'm just curious, you know, because I have worked in Jharkhand, I worked in Ranchi many, many years ago, different project. But I was just curious, you know, in these different countries, how does this technology, a tool which at some level is this alien device, like you say, play out depending on the culture and the context? And how did that factor into your design of the implementation?
Well, when I taught my MOOC years ago, I mentioned some of the keywords and the principles around the design of these learning tools. First, it has to be simple. Simplicity is innovation. If it's complicated, no one will be able to figure it out. Even if the most motivated teachers will not be able to sustain the efforts, because if it is cumbersome and complicated, no one wants it. So it has to be simple. So I always say simplicity is innovation. And localization means a lot more than just the language. Localization means understanding the culture, their rooted habits, the social norms, everything. You have to consider all these facts to come up with a solution that works or that might work for a particular region. So it's not just the language. And also it has to be fun for the students who are engaging in this. And there has to be an incentive for the teachers if they are facilitating. So knowing all these, when I started with the Pocket School, I always started with a game-based learning. It's game. It's not about listening or watching a video for hours. It's not that. They want to engage because it's fun to play. Right? So I started with that, the principle, overarching principle. It has to be fun to play, easy to engage. It's meeting my needs, my local needs, my immediate needs. So these were the principles that I used in this project. And then with the Smile project, and I will talk more about it, and that those principles continue to exist in my design.
And Paul,
Let me just jump in before you get into Smile to go back to what you said about will it make any difference? I think ironically, it will make a difference most where teachers have had the least to do. Because if teachers still have a curriculum that they're supposed to deliver, then it's just a bad classroom experience, even worse than a traditional classroom experience. But if teachers don't have a curriculum, if they're really having to be creative and improvise, and so kids are not doing math, they're writing about how the virus is changing their lives, for example, and what's happening in their families, and they're interacting with their parents as part of schooling, and they're doing these kind of peer-based learning by doing things. When they go back to the classrooms, it's likely to be the kids that are the least satisfied. They're going to say, oh no, I'm going back to this dreadful industrial era schooling. Not that they would use that term. You know, I'm not interacting with my parents anymore. I'm not interacting with my peers anymore. This stuff has no meaning in my life. It was so great when we had the virus and I was actually learning in a different way. So somehow we've got to get those stakeholders at the table and those voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Paul, I was going to talk about this at the end, but since you brought it up, you do have a short book on MOOCs. You taught a MOOC. You talk about it in a couple chapters in my book. you talk about ecological model and getting kids to work with one another, create low bandwidth videos, translate the content to local languages, all this stuff. How did you get all that to happen with 20,000 people? What was the way to get kids around the world working on projects together in a concerted effort?
Because you participated in it, and our Professor Chris Beatty had a chapter in there as well.
Now, how did you get the MOOC to work? How did you get the designing a new learning environment? How did you get all those kids around the world to work together?
Here's the secret. Besides wonderful lecture by Chris Beatty and Kurt Funk and other friends who participated in that as a content provider, the secret is this: I wanted to make an intro that may mean something to people around the world. How do I do that? I created a very short video with the pictures from different parts of the world, and I briefly describe what the course is about. It's about designing a new learning environment. A lot of people want to change, and they want to do something about it, but they just don't know how. They don't know where to start. So I wanted to give them that sort of the trigger to people who are concerned about education. And so I had that little short introduction video, and then I started to tweet about that course. And I asked my friends in different parts of the world. I have friends in China, Indonesia, Malaysia, or Oman, or Uruguay, around the world. I asked them to, hey, can you retweet this? So they all retweeted. A lot of people thought that, oh, that's a very interesting video. And they watched some of the videos. And they said, can I do something about it? Can I not only participate in the class, but I'd like to do something, actually. So the course is a project-based learning course. Everyone has to participate. Everyone has to work in teams. In some interesting teams where a middle school student was a leader, and there was a PhD who was a team member. I love it. I love it. Why not? The more educated people were able to become facilitators for others. And because many students in that class, 20,000, they were so passionate, they asked me constantly, I want to do more for you. So I said, what about student ambassadors? And so I had a conference call with like 30 different people. And I asked them, what can you do? And then they said, I would love to translate your contents into my language. Okay, what is the language you speak? Chinese. Okay, how about you? Arabic. How about you? Spanish. Okay, then you guys go and translate all these. They said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And some students started to ask, hey, can we actually download all YouTube videos and put them on Youku? Because in China, we can't access YouTube. So, well, that's a good point. So students started to download all the content and re-uploaded it to wherever the platforms that they were using in their country to make it more accessible. So when we think about localization, we think about just language. But if you think about the details, there's so many things you have to do, and you cannot do all those things without the help of your passionate volunteers. So I would say half of the students in the class were volunteers, basically. And they were helping each other. They were not only translating the contents, they were making reference materials, study guides, the meetup plans, all those things. You know where I was when I was doing that MOOC? I was in Tanzania, in a rural place. And what did I have?
With my son, I think, at the time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What did I have? I just had a phone. That was it. I had all the messages that I pre-typed and everything ready to go. And when I was in Tanzania, I just started to access all the contents through my phone. All I needed was internet access. And I was able to talk to students from Zanzibar or Lahore, Ranchi. And I was just so impressed. But all those things happened because they wanted to do something about education, and they were passionate volunteers. And without them, nothing would have happened.
So Chris or Punya, do you have a question asked before we go on to the SMILE project? Because I know we want to get a chance to get to that. Do you have any comments? Punya? I have one question.
keep
What-
go,
I
yeah,
have one
I think we should
question
move.
for you, Paul. We had Sugata Mitra, he was our first guest. Are you, the alien pedagogy that you espouse, is that similar to his sole ideas? I mean, you've talked to Sugata, you've met him. Are you guys operating on the same wavelength, or you're totally different? What do you think?
I wouldn't say totally different, but I would say we got to have a facilitators. I don't think that, when I was doing the alien pedagogy in Mexico, for example, I gave them the devices and I prompted them and asked them, I kind of gave them little hints along the way. That's very powerful. That would save a lot of time, and that sort of guidance will make sure that they're not doing things in the wrong way. To make the time more effective, I think that a really good facilitator is needed. It doesn't have to be a really knowledgeable facilitator, because I don't have to know everything. And I have to admit that I don't know everything anyway. But if I know a little bit about leading the children, pedagogy, that's what it means, right? If I know a little bit about how to lead the children, it could be anyone, but I think that it's a must. You have to have some sort of a facilitator who is there to give them the prompters and triggers as needed to lead them properly.
So if I can
go ahead.
Kurt, just one quick comment, Paul. In fact, what you're saying, if you go back when there are people who have gone back and looked at a lot of the hole in the wall few years after it had been set up, and the places where they have actually established themselves are places where teachers have taken responsibility for it. So that crucial media, it's still student curiosity driven and so on, but there is a mediator who helps guide that and structures that. So I think I think I completely concur with what you're saying, that role is a crucial one. It doesn't have to be that intrusive the way we have it today in schools, but there is this need for that pedagogical mediation.
Two terms I'll throw out is Paul uses the term ecological model in his chapter in my MOOCs book. And if anyone wants the chapter, send me an email and I'll send you Paul's chapter. And Paul, what Paul's talking about is guided discovery learning. And Sugata is talking about peer discovery learning. There's a difference between the two. So Paul, you want to move on to show us something about the SMILE project, and then we'll ask you some questions about it. And I'm not sure how much you can show us, but make sure you get to the AI part, because that's a...
Yes, I'll talk about SMILE. As I was doing projects like Pocket School and other projects, I started to get a lot of questions from the children that I was working with. And their questions were so great. And I don't get that many questions in a conventional classroom where a teacher is the one who's asking questions, not the students. But in a learning environment like I've been creating and implementing, I was able to get so many questions from the children. I did not want to waste those questions. So I started to think, is there any way we can make a system or platform that can enable the students to learn from each other's questions? So that was the simple premise for the SMILE project. And here is how it works. Students make questions, whatever the questions they come up with while they're engaged in their learning materials. They could be watching videos, they could be thinking about some science phenomena, and then they come up with the questions. So they type in their questions, they can incorporate photos that they take from their environment, or they could be drawing something, they could be sketching their design, but they all incorporate those things with their questions, and they simply press a button and they share their questions with their peers. And so their peers are solving each other's questions, they're evaluating each other's questions, and they reflect on them, then they exchange their ideas around those questions, and that's how they learn. So that was the simple sort of the working model that I came up with. And then in that model, there's a sense of a collaboration, because they are discussing and they're discovering things together. And at the same time, there's a little bit of competition too, because we're trying to get better rating on the questions. I want to be able to get a 5-star questions, not 1-star question, right? And I found the same process at Google. Google has a system called Dory, where all the employees at Google, they are encouraged to come up with the questions, and they post in a Google platform called a Dory. And every employee can look at their questions. They can evaluate each other's questions. And certain questions get evaluated high. They bubble up to the top. And the CEO or the executive team of the company, they look at all the top questions and then they answer them to the employees. Now, if you look at, hey, what is this Dory platform? Can we use it? Maybe. This is not about technology again. This is about culture. Culture of inquiry, it is the hardest thing because of the pedagogical virus that the traditional education has spread in the classroom. So the traditional model does not allow students to come up with their questions freely. And if you look at developing country context, students are afraid to ask questions. Because if I remember the school time when I was going to school in Korea, K-12, if I ask a dumb question, I get spanked. So why would I earn spanking in a classroom? So I just be quiet, right? But the culture of questioning, that is a trigger for innovation and change. And Google, yes.
Punya's gonna want to jump in here real quick before you go on. Punya,
Sure.
Go ahead. You're muted, Punya.
Sorry about that. This is a question which connects, I think, very directly, Paul, with what you're speaking to, was again asked on the chat. And the question really was this issue around culture, is that how do we bring this form of questioning, inquiry, open-ended sort of pedagogy to schools where tech is not the barrier, but it's the industrial teaching, which I take to mean in this context to be what you are speaking of as being the culture to engagement. I think that to me is in terms of like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do we design systems and culture? Because, in EdTech, we tend to focus on the artifacts and processes, but that the barriers are actually systemic and cultural. So if you could speak to that, because I think it addresses the question pretty directly.
So let me quiz you. If you have to work with the first graders or the 12th graders, which group do you think you will have much easier time with pedagogical model like SMILE?
Oh, first graders.
Why?
Because we haven't messed them up already.
Exactly. So when I work with the first graders, they think SMILE is schooling. They think this is the norm. So they come up with all kinds of questions and they are not embarrassed to ask questions. They love learning through SMILE. If I work with a higher grade students or even adults, I have worked with the corporate employees as well doing SMILE. You know what they're saying? I would love to ask questions, but can I hide my name? That's what I hear from the adults. The older they get, they're more afraid to ask questions. The younger kids, they have no problem. They don't ask such thing. So it is important to start from fresh, if possible, so that they think this is schooling, right? And obviously, there are other features that I would love to talk about. So let me get back to SMILE. So this Dory system is identical to SMILE, and I wanted to give this wonderful culture to all the schools around the world, all education environments around the world. And I started with the Stanford Class. This is the undergrad Stanford course where students are generating lots of questions. This particular class was a political science undergrad students, and they had fun, a lot of fun creating questions, sharing them and answering them and rating them and discussing why your question deserves 5 stars versus why my question deserves only 1 star. And just having that discussion was a lot of fun. And so we embedded a SMILE in Canvas as well. So we developed an API. So any professor who wants to run SMILE within Canvas, they can certainly do this. And also we put the AI feature to this so that you don't have to even I mean, you would value peer evaluation of the questions, but if you don't have too many people evaluating your question, you could use the AI feature there where you can click a button and evaluate my question. It will give you a result, and I will demonstrate that too. And I started to implement it in many different settings, in colleges and K-12 schools and corporate settings where students are formulating questions in teams and sharing them. And the role of a professor has changed drastically because they're not lecturing things anymore. They are prompting students to come up with questions. So even before you start a class, you would say, hey, we're going to learn about HIV next week. Come up with the 3 questions that deserve 5 stars. The students would pre-read the material and they will get in teams and make strategies. How do we get 5 stars from our peers? So they discuss, they come up with strategy, they come up with a multi-dimensional questions that may deserve 5 stars. And when the class starts, they're discussing the questions and the results of the question evaluations. The professors are going through the student questions and see which question received the 5 stars versus 1 star. And then so the professor is facilitating the process and facilitating the discussion process among the students. Here's another example. This is from Argentina, where there's a panel of experts. They're discussing why there is a problem with the question, or why this question has a flaw, or how they can improve the questions, etc. So they're discussing a lot about the question, but the questions contain the principles and concepts and very important nuggets that the students must grasp in the class. So as I've been implementing SMILE in many different learning environments around the world, I started to think, how could I take this to the developing world? And then luckily I found a company called Marvel that came up with the SMILE Plug computer, which is a router, a server, Wi-Fi, everything in one box. And this runs a SMILE on battery. So I was able to take this to many different places around the world. This is a mountain school in Mexico where children are typing their questions and challenging each other. These young kids, when they are given the opportunity to come up with the questions, they come up with all kinds of creative questions. These creative questions are real learning objects for these students. And what I found from a study like this is that I found from this Mexican classroom was that all the kids in their classroom was spelling certain words incorrectly. And I asked the teacher, why are they spelling this word all incorrectly? Everybody does that. Why is that? The teacher said, well, I did not know that. We typically don't know that until they do the state exam. But if you get them to take the state exam, isn't it too late because they move on to the next grade? There's nothing you can do about it. But if you do this in every single class, every single subject, you learn a lot about what they know, what they don't know, or what misunderstanding they have in the class. So this is another example in Indonesia, Pesantren School. Students are making their own math questions and challenging each other. This is in Tanzania where students are creating questions and then they are challenging them. And then as you can see on the right upper image, the teacher is showing everybody the questions that they have generated. Now, when I interviewed these students, they said, you know what? SMILE has changed some dynamics here in our class. And I asked what? The children said, the teachers come better prepared. He's not just writing things on the board anymore. He comes better prepared because we come up with so many questions that we cannot answer. And some questions teachers cannot answer either. So we are having a lot of fun. So teachers who are open-minded about these challenging questions, they love this project. Teachers who do not like a lot of challenging questions, they don't like this. So as you can see, teachers who do not want to learn the new pedagogy, who do not want to be challenged with creative questions, they don't like this at all.
Paul,
So-
I'm going to interrupt for a second. You
Sure.
never said what SMILE stands for, and some people might be visually impaired who are going to listen to the show. Tell them what SMILE stands for.
SMILE stands for Stanford Mobile Inquiry-Based Learning Environment.
Okay. And I also know that we need to get to some more questions, and you still need to show us the AI app that you've developed.
Yeah.
And it's going to be real intriguing. So I want to make sure you get to that before we go back to questions.
Yes. So we started to put medical schools lecture videos and contents on the SMILE plug, and we distributed it to universities in Africa as well. And the SMILE plug was back then was about $200. I wanted to make it cheaper. So we're using Raspberry Pi. This is called the SMILE Pi now. The Raspberry Pi is about $35. So with that little device, this is your server, this is your Wi-Fi, this is your storage, this is everything for you. And this runs on battery for a very, very long time. And so we put the SMILE Learning Management System, we put the entire copy of Wikipedia, we put Khan Academy, we put 5 or 6 different coding schools, we put digital library books, and we put CK12 digital curriculum. And then we put various labs, art labs, or music labs, or physics simulation labs, etc., all in that little box, $35. Now, today we talk about digital divide and those places where they're complaining that we don't have electricity, we don't have internet. Well, we have a solution already for you, and we've been using this for years now. So we started to take it to many different places, and this is what I think SMILE does. We get the students to evaluate, we get the students to create, we get them to analyze, we get them to synthesize questions, we get them to present questions. These keywords sound familiar? You've seen this somewhere, right? And I believe these are the higher order learning activities. And perceptually, they get the sense of achievement because they are creating something and sharing. They have the sense of ownership, and they have the sense of self-efficacy as well. Here's the research project that I did in Ghana. The more SMILE sessions that they had, the higher scores on their performance in their subjects. Basically, the number 3 school here, that's the school with the lowest frequency of SMILE sessions. And the number 1 school and number 5, they are the ones that have the highest frequency of SMILE sessions. So as you can see, this does make a difference. And I started to use the SMILE for a variety of different learning environments and scenarios with hands-on makery classes, teacher training programs, etc. And now we're getting millions and millions of questions from around the world. What do I do with all the student questions? I started to evaluate them. How do I evaluate millions of questions? I can't. What do I do? I have to use AI. And so we have the framework to evaluate all the student questions with the 5 different levels. And I had to use a variety of different tools to evaluate them. Once I have that evaluation data, I use that data to evaluate new questions. And here are some of the tools that I use to develop these machine learning based student evaluation, the question evaluation tool. So if you ask a question such as this, if the public education systems in the US are all federalized, what would be the pros and cons? That's not a simple recall question, right? This is not a level 1 question. The system says level 5 question, and then with a 99.999% confidence level. So I started to use that AI function for many different assessment scenarios. What if we get the students to read an article like this and have them ask questions? They have to come up with most creative and innovative question about the article that they read. Once they read the questions, the system evaluates them. If you are simply asking, what is the main topic of the article, then you get level 1, right? But if you come up with innovative questions about the article, then you get level 5. So there's a little bit of a competition or sort of a gamifying feature there as well. And if you get stuck, like, I don't know how to ask questions, then you type in some keywords and it will generate some sample questions for you to look at. These questions are the questions that have been asked from people around the world. So basically there's a Google search behind this feature to grab the question that contain the the questions that contain the keywords. Now, we've been doing a lot of questions in text. I wanted to see, can we do this verbally? So I don't have to use the textual feature, but the verbal, the assistant feature. So here is the sample. Okay, Google, talk to Stanford Smile.
What great questions do you have in mind? Let me evaluate your question.
What is the capital city of California?
Well, that's an interesting question for a very few people. Your question may trigger simple recall. Your audience will simply respond to your type of question without much thinking or state simple fact or common sense. Therefore, your question is considered a level 1 question. Please tell me another question.
What is a level 1 question to you?
A level 1 question looks for answers that can be easily found in Google search. If all is well, please tell me a great question.
Interesting. What is a level 5 question then?
A level 5 question often triggers hypothetical questions that require reevaluation of scientific phenomena, business conditions, or political status quo that needs a new breakthrough question. A question such as, what if we make a flashlight technology that can cancel ultraviolet light, would be considered a level 5 question. If all is well, please share your great question.
How many levels are there?
5 levels so far. If you would like to know what each level question type sounds like, simply ask what each level question is like. I will be happy to explain and give sample questions. Now, if all is well, please tell me a great question.
What is a great question to you, actually?
Let me give you a sample question that cannot be answered by simple recall. What would happen to Earth if infrared light is removed from the full spectrum of light from sun? If all is well, please share your great question.
Why is it important to share a great question with you?
Helen Keller said that a well-educated mind will always have more questions than answers. Stanford Smile is to help all learners to learn and grow with critical and creative questions. Therefore, ask a question to learn, change, and innovate. Please share your great question today.
You get the idea now. So that video I came up with in 2018. So it's kind of old now. So I have a variety of different features that can help students getting a very free, comfortable conversation. And also the system remembers every single word that the child says and every single question that the child asks. And then it will have a much deeper dialogue. And then this is already available for you right now. If you install Google Assistant on your phone, and then just simply say, okay, Google, and talk to Stanford Smile, then you can do this by yourself today. But we are adding more features around it.
So there have been some questions from on the chat about the
I have
Canvas.
only two or three more slides. So why don't I finish?
Once you finish them off, then we go back to,
Sure.
Yeah, so the most important thing is that if you want to make this as a conversation, you don't want the AI to take 10 seconds to answer. It has to come in less than 4 seconds, right? Because we don't wait for that long for someone to answer. So that is the sort of the challenge here. The idea is that I want to have a virtual assistant for every child around the world. You remember that Raspberry Pi, that $35 Pi? I want to put that virtual coach in a little device like that. And then so that students around the world can talk to the coach about their questions and get their questions evaluated and get in a conversation with them. But I have a lot of challenges with the natural language processing because the systems does not know when someone says, break a leg. And they will literally understand it as, oh, break a leg. right? So those things, there's a lot of nuances that only people know, and then we have to train the systems to do it. So here are some of the links for you to follow up. There's some research papers that I published, and then there's a Smile Pi link. There's the original Smile, and also.
Yeah, this week in the blog post, there should be a link to a video that shows this in action, shows kids asking questions and it evaluates. You'll see that if you go to the blog post, and you'll see kids, and it'll see that's a level 3 question, or that's a level 4 question.
Yes.
So there's a lot more to this than what we saw here, and it's very interactive with the kids.
All right, so I'll take all the questions.
Yeah, so a great.
No, that was perfect. I mean, that was the question, which is like, how can people access some of this? So we'll make sure to put some of those links up there on the Silver Lining website as well. And yeah, so that was, I think, one of the main questions. Chris, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I want to step
add
back
to that. How can they access it, Paul?
Which one?
The Smile off of Google Home or off of whatever.
Yeah, I mean, people are asking about the Canvas plugin. I mean, is that something that's available?
Yes,
Use with Canvas?
it is available. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Chris.
No worries. I want to step back from your work, Paul, and just talk about a larger lesson in terms of implementation. And this is a theme that came out in Sugata Mitra's episode. It came out last week in the episode from Uruguay. Part, I think, of why you've gotten the kind of uptake that you have, which is tremendous, is that it's a simple package, and the tech, the access, and the curriculum are all there together. And that contrasts with systems that just sell the tech, and then people don't know what to do with it, so they don't do very good things with it. Or systems that sell the curriculum, but then you've got to figure out the tech and the access, and people get bogged down in that in a hurry. So I think there's a lesson there in terms of how we need to think about uptake. And the fact, as you point out, that very inexpensive devices now can be the computer, they can be the memory, they can be the server, they can be everything. That's the way to think about it, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to get a tablet, and then I'm going to get a router, and then I'm going to get an ISP, and so on and so on. And pretty soon the costs mount up and the power goes down. So that's an observation that I wanted to make that I think is important. What do you see yourself doing next? I mean, I know that you're working with Smile, but one of the things I like about your work is that you don't just do something and you fall in love with it and then you keep doing it for the rest of your career. You pick a new adventure and go on that. Is there something on your new adventure horizon?
Well, I have several things in my mind. I mean, that's
besides being a park ranger in hydroponics, which you've talked to me about before.
Yeah. And as a pilot, I like to have a smile flights that I can deliver a smile around the world. And then I need a co-pilot. So if anyone wants to venture with me, that would be great. So I'm thinking of a few projects locally as well as internationally. Now I have a very interesting partners, very large partners like edify.org. They have about 1 million students in the developing countries, and then we're implementing Smile with all 1 million students. And what we are building is quite incredible. We are only a few weeks away from completing a dashboard that shows the history of all the questions from different students, different class, different school, different region, different country. And it gives you the pattern of how their questions are changing over time. Are they making better questions over time? Are they making less mistakes with grammar, spelling? And then are they adding more important vocabulary, the higher grade level vocabulary over time? This is a CEO dashboard for the whole global Smile. And so I'm very excited with that. And also we have the Smile, the original Smile website, smile.stanford.edu, but we also have the native mobile version of a Smile, which is smileup.site. I think the link is there as well. And also I'm continuing with the AI features so that I can really deliver the really low cost. If it is more than 50, $100, that's a lot of money. So I'm going to be utilizing phones as well, because these smartphones are great. We already have the AI feature in this phone already. And so as I said, you can just install Google Assistant on your phone. That's all you need. And then you can try the Smile, the verbal version of that too. But I want to make it really smart. I want to make it so smart that it can be a wise coach, right? It's not just simply answering all your questions, because that's not the goal of learning. You're not just learning to find answers, but you're learning to learn. And I'd like to engage students to be continuously curious. I want them to find joy in learning and discovering and experimenting. So I have several projects around that as well. And also I have a project called Halo-Fi. I don't think I have the link there. Halo-Fi is basically, it's a STEM education program that uses the United Nations Sustainable Goal Development themes. And so students have to develop a solution to solve that grand challenges. And doing so, they are generating questions along the way. So it's a design thinking, makery, and Smile all combined. And
so I think we need to end there.
Okay.
We could probably go on and on.
We could go on, yes.
Yeah, that's a good point to end on. And you haven't even talked about your home country, Korea, and what's going on there. And maybe we need to bring you back sometime, just talk about all the innovations happening in Korea as we circle, and maybe with others from Korea. Maybe we bring you back on a panel talking about what projects are going on in Korea. But this hour has been wonderful. People have learned A to Z and how to smile, even in the end. We're all smiling with you. And there's going to be people watching the show later who will be following up with you, Paul.
Sure.
And so you might want to type your email address in the chat window so they can get that, and we can provide that too. Again, thank you, Paul Kim from Stanford. Thank you for joining us in Silver Lining for Learning. We have to talk about next week's episode, and some guests are coming from Italy. And Punya might want to introduce those guests. So take it away, Punya.
So thank you again, Paul. I'm in the chat on YouTube. People are very excited. I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of emails and stuff to follow up on that. And the idea of this virtual coach resonates because I was just listening to Michael Lewis's new podcast, Against the Rules. I don't know if his second season is just coming out, and the whole focus is on this idea of coach and the role that coaches play. So kind of intriguing connection from like what I was hearing yesterday to this conversation here. Next week, we're going to have two visitors from Italy. As you know, that Italy was one of the first countries hit very heavily by the COVID-19 crisis. And some of us, as we got hit a little later, we could learn from what was happening in China, what was happening in Italy, what these guys were sort of literally inventing it as we speak. Our two guests are going to be Dr. Nicoletta Di Blas. She's in the Department of Electronics and Information at Politecnico di Milano. She has a background in linguistic science, works in the field of engineering and communication, but works with teachers. So this interesting combination there. And overnight, they basically set up a MOOC with 3,000 plus teachers. They've also collected some data on it. So we'll be sharing some of that as well. The other person who will be joining Nicoletta will be Dr. Tommaso Agassisti. He works in the area of school management and looking at school leadership. So we'll bring that perspective as schools in Italy address this crisis. There's a lot more that I can talk about each of them, but I'm sure we will have all that next week. Again, Paul, thank you very much. This was an absolutely exciting show. Learned a lot, personally speaking, so grateful for that. But I think all the people on the channel are also deeply appreciative.
A great pleasure.
Kurt, last words?
Just it's good to see you, and we're gonna have to have a panel of all of us someday at a conference getting together. I think that and just hang out physically when we can do so. So that's fine. Chris, do you have any final thoughts? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming this week, and we'll end the show right there. Thanks.
Thank
All
you.
right.